of blended finance, and that will be occurring at the same time. My colleague Mariah, I think, is going to try to drop the registration for that event in the chat for those of you who are interested. And then back to today's topic, and to help us unpack a blended finance case study, Global Affairs Canada and RENEW thought it would be useful to host this learning event following the completion of the 5-year Accelerating Business Growth Program, which took place in Ethiopia from 2016 to 2021. You can find the link to the program summary, the project summary, in the chat window as well. So just to give you a little bit of an overview, the goal for the next 90 minutes is to share and discuss what we learned from the ABG project and hear your related insights. We want you to leave with ideas that can help you design, evaluate, and run blended finance projects. So the agenda will look like this. We're going to hear from 5 perspectives. We're going to hear from the donor, the manager, entrepreneurs, an investor, and of course, at the end, we're hoping to hear feedback from you, the community. So we ask that you stay engaged, ask questions, you can put them in your chat, and attend this with the spirit of we're here to learn and of course to share. A few housekeeping items: please come off mute and put your camera on when you are speaking, and please keep your remarks focused to the topic of blended finance. We are recording the event. Hopefully somebody can go on mute. We're recording the event and plan to share the summary materials with you after the event. So first, I would like to ask Ryan Clark, the Head of Development Cooperation at the Embassy of Canada in Ethiopia, to share a few opening remarks with us. Ryan, are you there?
I am, Laura. Hi, everybody. Thank you. Well, thank you very much for this opportunity, Laura. A lot of us have heard a lot about RENEW over the last couple of years. So great to have this opportunity to convene and to share lessons learned. I have only recently arrived in Addis Ababa as the new head of development cooperation here, but I can tell you that I had heard about RENEW quite a bit before my arrival. My previous job, helping to set up GAC's blended finance group and MLI. We, of course, we're looking at scaring the department for examples of successful blended finance initiatives, and RENEW was always at or very near the top of that list. So it's great to be a part of an event talking about some of the lessons learned in that case. I think it's no secret to anybody who's on this line or anybody in the department or anybody that works in the development community that official development assistance never has been enough and never will be enough. And that really, in order for the world to have any sort of plausible ideas for how to fill the financing gap associated with the SDGs, or how to come up with truly sustainable initiatives that local governments and private sector and local communities could take on, that means that a blended approach is required. That's blended finance. And for those that don't know, the definition of this is simple: $1 of public funds and $1 of private funds. Like, that's it, going into the same initiative in a development context, going towards trying to get some sort of positive development impact. So in my personal experience in dealing with these types of projects, no surprise, the transaction costs are huge. A lot of sweat equity has to go into these types of engagements. A lot of early ideation and risk taking on both sides, from both the private sector and from the public financier, and from governments if they are involved, and host governments in the developing countries themselves. So lots of opportunity costs associated with doing these types of transactions in a development context versus more traditional ways of doing business. And so therefore you have to go into that eyes wide open and have to be prepared to put in the sweat equity required, and be prepared to really truly sit down and align a series of interests towards hopefully greater impact and greater effect. And then get ready to deal with the massive pushback that you'll get from systems and external systems that say, yes, we want innovation, yes, we want collaboration, yes, we want to mobilize private capital. But at the same time, systems and cultures are never ready to keep up with that level of aspiration. So my advice to all of any of you who are thinking of stepping into this space based on some of the lessons learned from the RENEW example is get ready to take your lumps and get ready to really line up all of your partners and your interests to ensure that you're putting forward the most sustainable idea possible, and then be patient, be very, very, very patient. But I can tell you when it works, it's worth the rub. And we're going to hear today from our colleagues here, from my colleague Kathy Oginski and the team here, and from the RENEW team, and from the partners that Laura already mentioned, that when it works, it's worth the pain. So thank you again, Laura, for the opportunity, and thanks everybody who is able to participate today. Looking forward to listening in as long as I can. I happen to be chargé this week, so I might have to get pulled out to do some chargé duties, but I look forward to listening in as long as I can. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ryan. We appreciate that you're here and all the work that Global Affairs has done with us over the past 5 years. So now I would like to ask Kathy Oginski, the first Secretary of Development from the Embassy of Canada in Ethiopia, to share some lessons learned from the Global Affairs perspective. Kathy, over to you. Kathy, are you there?
Should I unmute myself? Do you hear me now?
Yes, we hear you. Thank you.
Okay, sorry, breaking all protocol. It's been a year and a half and I still forget to unmute. So talking about culture shifts and learning curves. So just to thank Ryan again very much for the introduction. Laura, Matt, everyone at RENEW, thanks very much for taking the initiative of organizing this learning event. I'm very excited about it. Ryan has alluded to it already a bit about just what real learning means when you do something that's not traditional development and traditional approaches, and that tends to present a lot of learning. And so that is what I was really drawn to about the focus of this event, is not just talking about all these nice results, which are always nice to hear, and we can pat ourselves on the back, and we should, but more so, you know, where did we push the boundaries, and where did we push the learning, and where do we still have learning and figuring out to do. So with that, I'll try to give, kind of jumping off of what Ryan has shared already, echoing, I've joined the embassy 2 years ago. I'm in my 3rd year here, and came in already having heard quite a bit about RENEW and the Accelerating Business Growth Project. So was very excited to join on this project and find out what it was about, and to join that wild roller coaster of a learning curve myself. So the ABG project started in 2016, which was not too long after what was a pretty big deal at the time, the 3rd International Conference on Financing for Development here in Addis. And just nice timing that happened in Ethiopia as well. And there was a lot of, you know, excitement around this, of how do we get new financing platforms, new channels of finance for development, because as Ryan has mentioned, I mean, we have no hope of meeting the SDGs if we're going to love official development assistance as we do. It's never going to be enough to meet the Sustainable Development Goals as we're trying to achieve them. So a little bit about Ethiopia. Some people on the line may have lived here, worked here, read about it in the news very recently. It is, even still to this day, continues to be one of the fastest growing economies in the world, and certainly on the African continent. But despite this, in this context of, you know, 2015, 2016, when the ideas of ABG was being born, you have this, you know, booming economy, but yet a private sector and unemployment, or an employment rate that is just not keeping up for this massive population of over 110 million people in Ethiopia, over 40% of them being under the age of 14. So if you can think about that huge pressure that's creating, and the effects that has on, you know, economic growth and stability in the region, of all those young people not having work, that really was the impetus behind ABG's kind of an original goal of how do we create more jobs for this population. Within that, within the formal economy in Ethiopia, the small and medium enterprises that part of the formal economy was extremely thin. And this has to do with a lot of challenges in Ethiopia, where I sometimes chuckle when people say, yeah, we did this project in Uganda, we're going to do a replicate it in Ethiopia, or we did this in Kenya or Tanzania or Rwanda. It's not the same game in Ethiopia. And so those were some of the things in that SME ecosystem and that economic ecosystem that ABG was also seeking to address. So, where there's a lot of development finance coming in and a lot of ODA coming in to Ethiopia, no doubt, still the ability for that SME portion of the formal economy to access the funding they needed to grow was extremely restricted. At the same time, as I mentioned, knowing that in around the world, that SME part of the economy has the greatest potential to create jobs. So while in development, we know the humanitarian continuum and then some basic livelihoods, helping people generate some income for their households. But in terms of really bolstering job creation, it was that SME segment of the economy. And that's why ABG chose to work with that side. So that's a little bit about kind of the context of Ethiopia when ABG was born, why ABG chose to focus on working with SMEs, and a bit more about this part of the economy, which is called the missing middle. So as I mentioned, there's the humanitarian basic livelihoods continuum that people who work in development are fairly familiar with, but it's almost, part of my language, damned if you do and damned if you don't, of if you do well enough as a micro or small enterprise owner, you are so successful that then you're caught with no finance whatsoever, because you've essentially grown, you've been too good at what you're doing, you've gotten too successful, and you therefore need more money than you could ever access from a microfinance institution, which is very common in a context like Ethiopia, but you're still not big enough to access the funding you need from a commercial bank or that larger funding source. So that's where the term the missing middle comes from, is these people who have been too successful but aren't successful enough. And that leaves aside, and that's a whole other webinar and lessons learned about the gender inequalities in that area, in terms of if you wanted to get a loan, do you even have collateral? And chances are, if you're a woman, you don't. So as I said, that's a separate webinar, but I did come into, so that's a bit about Ethiopia when the project was born, a little bit about what ABG sought to achieve. Was this not only working with SMEs and entrepreneurs to help them accelerate growth and help them grow through this missing middle, but in order to do so, to access the capital they needed to do it when they couldn't get it because of that missing middle part of the economy that they were in. So just before I jump into a couple of what for me were the really two key learnings of working with ABG, and from learning from the past of before I came onto the project and continuing to work on ABG, a few shout outs to a lot of people in GAC who really were responsible for the success of this project, both for the vision behind it and pushing and meeting resistance and continuing to push and continuing to adjust and find out what information was needed to continue supporting this project. So certainly the name I've heard the most as the pioneer behind this project and behind a lot of the portfolio that is now heading into a next phase would be Corey Van Gaal, for sure. So I don't know if Corey's on the line, but a huge thanks to Corey for being the brains behind this. Quite a few others from Team Ethiopia: Min Tien Nguyen, Kelly Thompson, Sherry Martin, Jason Schmaltz, Katrina Finnegan, and that's just mentioning bilateral folks. There, of course, have been a lot of folks in other branches, not just the bilateral Ethiopia program, who were incredible allies and sometimes incredible devil's advocates as well, which is what has helped us to continue finessing this project essentially, and to think about what these types of projects need to succeed in this development context that we're in, and where we could perhaps improve them. And of course, the hard work of the team of RENEW for forever holding my hand and helping me understand in very layperson speak what it is that they do and how that perhaps translates into development language, and helping bring those worlds together, which I think blends quite well into my learnings. So are you still with me? Do people still hear me? I feel like I'm talking a lot here. Yeah?
No, you're doing great.
Okay. So I'm going to try to keep this higher level, but the two key learnings, Ryan alluded to this, is the main learning overall is that this type of work, especially when it's about mobilizing capital to feed into development projects, is that it's not, I have this in all cap letters that I'm looking at here right now, it's not traditional development. This isn't your We Are the World 1980s development. It really does require a culture shift. And while it is very exciting, usually culture shifts are a bit scary. And so to make those things less scary, we also need the tools and the supports along with it to help us do those things better and more confidently. So within that overall learning of this isn't, your mother's or your grandmother's traditional development, this does require a culture shift. There were two key culture shifts that I observed through the ABG project, and which I discussed at length with the RENEW team. And again, thank you for your patience. Was one, knowing that, so despite we know we need these new models, we need to work with new types of partners. And so working with new types of partners, and then always keeping in mind that, official development assistance, it's always about working with the poorest of the poor. And how do we ensure we're working with the poorest of the poor? And so those are the two things that I'll unpack just a little bit of, what were a challenge for me from the donor perspective. I'm sure we're a challenge for RENEW working with a donor, and trying to find our way forward together on that. So the first one being, working with new types of partners. Global Affairs Canada knows, and we're comfortable working with large multilateral institutions, big grants, putting the money out the door. They're going to spend it. Hopefully they'll report on it, but we're comfortable with that relationship. NGOs, we understand how NGOs work. We understand how to work with Canadian and some NGOs from other countries through contribution agreements, which have very clear set ways of how we work together. And so that marriage contract, if you will, is very clear. Now, when you're dating or trying to figure out how to date a new kind of partner, you need to develop new kind of a new rule book, essentially. And that's something that I think Global Affairs Canada is still trying to figure out, is how do you work with these new kinds of partners? Partly for, the contractual obligations, legal considerations that you need to think of, but always also with that pressure of, we know we need to be working with these new kinds of partners, but we almost don't know how to. We need to learn a new dance, but we don't know the dance moves yet. And so how do we do that? Linked to having working with new partners also is, this is a borderline lesson learned 1A, and then I'll go on to lesson 2, is bridging that narrative again that I talked about earlier about this, this exciting, this momentum behind trying to mobilize new sources of capital and new sources of investment into these projects to make them sustainable. And there's that very exciting narrative, but then there's also needing to have that evidence base and needing to have the track record and metrics behind that to satisfy, kind of the pre-wedding jitters of a donor. And so how do you bridge that exciting narrative with also the metrics and need for accountability and legal obligations that we have? Serving the poorest of the poor. So for those who work in development, you'll be aware that perhaps one of the guiding star is the Official Development Assistance Act, the ODA Act. And a big criteria of that is that the programming that we develop is informed by the views of the poor and the people that those programs are going to serve, and ensuring that it meets their needs. Where this becomes tricky is when we all know how that looks in humanitarian and basic livelihoods programming. It's very clear when you're doing food distribution, how that food is meeting the needs of the poor. It's very clear when you're helping someone establish a veggie kiosk or a tailoring kiosk or a veggie stand, how those parents who run those micro and small enterprises are using that income to support their households. The link is very clear to the poorest of the poor. When we start to look at this, what I call a ladder of economic empowerment, or a growth continuum, where you go from humanitarian to basic livelihoods to bigger economic growth, you start thinking about, well, that veggie stand, how sustainable is that? How many jobs is that veggie stand creating? Yes, it's feeding a family, but could it feed more families if they could employ more, or if they could be involved higher or further along in a value chain or a supply chain. So that's where it gets a bit murky about who is the poorest of the poor and what is the link to serving the poorest of the poor, and what can you do to have your biggest bang for buck, to have a greater ripple effect on the poorest of the poor, even if they're not your immediate direct beneficiary. And the rationale being because sometimes working with your immediate direct beneficiary won't have the most sustainable results, or down the road won't have the largest impact on others in the community. So that was very much the systemic approach, or systemic change approach that ABG was trying to use, was trying to reduce poverty by helping at a different entry point, perhaps in the economic ecosystem, that would have a greater impact to pull others out of poverty by creating more jobs, by leveraging funds to attract more funding into entrepreneur schemes and small and medium-sized enterprises for that greater ripple effect. So those are touchy, and maybe people will feel those are a little bit touchy. I know in development, those are kind of two very strong tenets that we carry with us. And again, about to hand it over to Matt to hear a bit from Renew's perspective, but I do raise those things as the touchy things because I think those are the important things we can discuss to bring us to future learning, rather than just talking, as I said, about the nice results. I want to talk about what were those real nitty-gritty things that we had to deal with in this project. And that I think as a department, we're still really trying to figure out if we are to achieve this culture change that we say we're striving to, and I think that we know we need to. But how do we figure out how to dance together? So thank you very much for your patience. I hope some of what I've said has resonated or perhaps excited some people. And with that, I'm going to hand it back, I believe, to Matt. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kathy. Great job. And you touched on so many good points. I think what I'm going to do now is give the project manager's perspective of the Accelerating Business Growth Project, and I'm going to try to get into lessons learned as quickly as possible. But I just want to say thank you for everyone that's attending. There's a lot of great people on the call that I see that have been part of this project in various different functions and forms. And I want to encourage everybody to use the chat to chat in your questions, because one way or the other, either during this or at the end or after, we'll try to get your questions answered, because this is a learning event. So what I'm going to do now is just give some very quick background on the project, dive into what we did, what we achieved, then get into, most important, the lessons learned. So to start, it all begins here with blended finance and these colorful pictures. These are the Sustainable Development Goals. They have to be achieved by 2030. And some really smart people have figured out very fast that there is a massive funding gap to achieve these, to the tune of about $2.5 trillion per year to achieve these. Enter blended finance. How do we actually get that funding gap filled? And blended finance is an amazing thing. Again, Convergence is really the thought leader in this space, and I've taken this straight from them. Blended finance is used to catalyze capital. So Ryan said it, $1 of donor funds, $1 of private capital. The goal really is to try to get more in, though. And what we're going to talk a little bit about is exactly what we tried to do with ABG. But this picture really summarizes it. I love it. You see donor funding mobilizing private capital to try to both get market-based returns, either lowering the risk profile of a deal or bringing down the cost to make those investment capital dollars competitive relative to other comparable investments. And that's very challenging to do in frontier markets. Now we'll get into some of the background on the project. I love this picture. This picture on the right, you could pretty much take that picture and it represents Africa. It represents multiple countries across Africa. This is the youngest population in the world, and it is rapidly growing. And a lot of those young people are entering the workforce. Each year, 10 to 12 million people in Africa enter the workforce, but unfortunately, the private sector is only creating 3 million new jobs per year. That's an 8 million job deficit That is a huge, massive problem for all of us that are passionate about trying to do good, but also for those here on the continent that are trying to build up the economy. So we know that some jobs come from here. These are micro enterprises, but more jobs come from here, and these are small and mid-sized enterprises. But as Kathy pointed out, SMEs are stuck in this weird dead zone in the capital market called the missing middle. It's more than micro enterprise, but it's less than commercial debt financing or private equity funds. Most PE funds are not going to invest below $5 million. Most micro enterprises aren't going to lend much more than $50,000. There's very few people playing in this space. So that really was the background problem that was driving the creation for RENEW as an investment firm, but also the ABG project. And this funding gap is about $90 billion per year here. So that SME funding gap, the size of the missing middle, is about $90 billion per year. So enter our blended finance structure. Canada wanted to create jobs and improve the ecosystem here in Ethiopia. RENEW wanted to make successful impact investments, and that is how we came to the Accelerating Business Growth Project. The ultimate outcome of that was stronger and more sustainable job creation, including those for low-skilled workers, men, women, young adults, through a dynamic, growing small and medium business sector in Ethiopia, read SMEs. So Global Affairs contributed 8.2 million CAD. RENEW contributed 3.08 million. It was a 5-year project. And just to dive into what we did, first, we needed to build the supply side of the capital market. So that's very different than the demand side. When you think accelerators, you think incubators, you think BDS providers, they are all trying to get deals ready for people like us. But when you have the big demo day, when you have those big events, here in Ethiopia, there were no investors. There's no supply of capital. So we knew when we went to work with Global Affairs immediately, we had to get working on building up those innovative finance pools of capital for SMEs. Also, if anybody on the phone has done SME investing, you quickly realize that it's not always just a money problem. There's a massive supply gap of strong middle management. These are CFOs, CMOs, COOs, CEOs, people that know how to build, scale, and grow companies successfully. So right there, those two sides of the pyramid, that is what the Accelerating Business Growth Project worked on. So real quick, I'm going to take you through a bunch of kind of fast pictures. You'll get these after. But we immediately launched a bunch of human capital market awareness training programs. We launched the PE 500, which was to educate people on how does private equity work? How does investing work? This was banks, governments, local entrepreneurs, brokers. You'd be shocked. Most people here just never heard of what is private equity? How does it work? It's either family businesses or bank debt. So we did, our target was 500, as the name implies, and we trained 650 people. Of the graduates of that, 2.9 million attract financing, 43% of that was to women-owned or led businesses. Next, we ran a program called the Execs Program. As the name implies, it was to train CEOs on how to be CEOs. How do you scale a company? Once you get that money, how do you grow it to drive job creation and returns for your investors? So we took 75 through that program. Our target was 75. We graduated 90. Just about 50% were women graduates. We did 5 cohorts of that. We also did a similar program for CFOs, and we ran a Women in Finance program to really try to help women in Ethiopia learn how to navigate the financial and capital markets of Ethiopia through a peer group. So those were all the human capital development, management development programs that we ran on that left-hand side of the pyramid. Over on the right-hand side of the pyramid, we also ran a whole bunch of programs. So first, and one of the things we launched was a program called Chickentovia. This was an edutainment program. Think of Shark Tank or Dragon's Den meets American Idol. It wasn't kind of a pitch and you get a no. We had to right size it for the culture in Ethiopia. So we actually took people through multiple rounds. It was quite popular. And we did 2 seasons of that, really helped expand the reach of educating Ethiopians about how investing works, entrepreneurship, getting out there, and that it is possible for you to get a $50,000 investment from a local investor. Next, we expanded the Impact Angel Network, which is now about 170 families, one of the largest angel networks dedicated to investing in Africa. We're one of the most active investors in East Africa. They did 15 investments in 12 companies, created over 2,000 jobs. We grew that into Canada. We grew it in the United States. And then finally, we built a blended finance vehicle that was also designed, again, to fill that missing middle. So ultimately, what we had and what we built as part of the ABG program was rungs of the capital market. That 50 to 150, 150 to 1 million, 1 million to 3 million. Really trying to mobilize capital, trying to get money from the private sector using $1 of ODA to try to lever in 7. At the end of the day, we got up to 9.7. So that was, we thought, really good. So that means $1 of ODA helped bring in 9.7 of capital from the private sector into program beneficiaries. So we mobilized 79.6 million CAD. We supported 6,744 jobs. We created 2,632, which ended up being about $3,000, $3,115 per ODA per job. So hopefully pretty good on that perspective. Here's some of the companies we invested in. Just to give a little bit of context, the way Renew's business model works is we are a for-profit company, but we're trying to do deals, again, that the risk-return profile, the risk is really high, the return is not close to being fully market adjusted. So we work in a blended finance model to buy down that risk, to bring down the cost to our investors, and ultimately try to get a good return. Now, does this work is the big question. And I just want to throw out some numbers for you to think about as you start considering more blended finance projects. I told you at the beginning, 90 billion is about the size of the missing middle in Africa, $90 billion. 41 billion is the amount of ODA that is coming into sub-Saharan Africa every year. Okay, so not even close to the amount that's needed to fill the missing middle. However, if you assume a good blended finance program gets something like 7x, $1 of ODA can lever in 7 more dollars of private capital, then you'd need about 32% of that 41 billion or 13 billion to actually fill the missing middle. Drive well over 2 million jobs created per year if you use that type of model. Now the challenge is only around 2 to 3% of ODA is actually going to blended finance projects. So we've got some work to do there. On to lessons learned. We have a number of them. I'm going to be perfectly honest. I'm going to try to be as blunt and honest with you about this as possible. Despite it being an absolutely amazing program that we really loved, we learned a lot. First, one is monitoring and evaluation. So with blended finance projects, you're really serving two masters. You're serving the investors and you're serving the donors. And right out of the gate, we were a little bit naive when we were doing our PMF, which is the performance management framework, where you're bound to that. You're bound to deliver on those KPIs. You have to report on those KPIs. But then on the other side of the equation, you have this massive fiduciary responsibility as an investment manager to constantly inform your investors on the deals that they've invested in. Now, if you don't walk into that with eyes wide open as a project manager of a blended finance program, and you don't try your best to manage the amount of reporting you have to do, you're quickly going to get overwhelmed trying to feed the donor reporting as well as the investor reporting. So lesson learned there. Be very careful what you sign up to in that PMF. Try to get as much alignment between the two reporting requirements as possible. Hey, we serve impact investors. They want to know about impact as well. But there's a lot that you kind of naively fill in coming into the project that, you know, a year and a half in, you're like, oh my gosh, that was way too much. So that's a major lesson learned for us. And I hope those of you who are thinking about this in the future apply that. Next one, persist on the outcomes, but be flexible on the activities. And I will tell you, Global Affairs Canada was amazing with this. I've seen a lot of other donors we worked with, no, this is what you said you would do, so you have to do it. Look, investing in Africa is relatively new for Western governments and Western investors. We are learning something new almost every single day. So if you think you know what you're going to be doing in year T-1, in year 4, you're crazy. It's just the market changes, the sector changes, the country we're in a civil war here. I mean, these things happen, and you can't predict those things when you're starting these programs. So be very flexible and work with your donor on being flexible on those activities and outcomes in the logic model, but be laser focused on those outcomes and really do everything you can to hit those, because you both care most about that. Don't be afraid to try something radical and new. Again, this ties into the lesson above, but when we first started the program, we had this like grand vision that we were going to set up these mini exchanges, which is what the name of our office is, where we do all of this work, in all these remote cities around Ethiopia to get our reach out. Well, there was a lot of civil unrest, and when we would get there, there'd be hardly anybody there. Not a lot of local partners that were willing to engage. We tried, but it was just not working. Then somebody came to us with an idea to launch an edutainment program. Boom, right there, we immediately we went from reaching like 200 or 300 people to 40 million viewers were watching this program and learning about investing, learning about entrepreneurship, learning about negotiating term sheets, learning about structuring deals. Our reach went way bigger. Now, if we had tried to design that at the beginning, or we thought that we knew what that was going to take and tried to put that in a logic model, we would have probably not come close to having the impact we had with that program. So again, don't try, work with your donors, talk to them about, hey, I think we should try this. This is new. It came to us. Let's see how it works. And feel free to innovate as you are rolling these programs out. A very big important one, money talks with policy reform. A lot of donors want you to have impact at scale, so impacting policy. Well, because we had done so many investments, we were the most active SME investment firm in Ethiopia. We knew, probably better than the government knew, all of the problems about investing in their country. So when we went to sit down at the table, and they knew RENEW, they knew the deals we did, they knew the program that we were working on, we had a lot more influence and a lot more ability to influence policy versus just boom coming out of the gate and trying to do that. So bring that capital in, get those investments done. That's how you're going to have policy reform. Stay the course. Don't get pulled away from your sweet spot. Look, it's really tempting to chase grant dollars. And all sorts of pet projects will come out. People will want you to do climate. They'll want you to go after this. They'll want you to. It's all well-intentioned. It's all really good. I mean, everything that a donor is asking you to do is just like our investors. Every deal they're sending us, hey, I met this great person. Will you look at this deal? Be very, very, very careful. As a program implementer of a blended finance program, your goal is to execute a model. All right, you have to use donor funding to make that sustainable and to create impact and a return. It's real easy to lose sight of that and to start going after deals that frankly should not be in your portfolio, and they should not be getting investment dollars. So stay with your sweet spot, stay the course. Extend the timeline. SMEs take a very long time to start seeing results. This has been proven by data that shows SMEs have a much longer gestation period than startups and large companies, but they're the biggest job creators. So if you do a deal on year 4 of a 5-year program, you're not going to see the results of that deal for year 10, way beyond the scope of the program reporting period. So work with your donors, find a way to either extend the timeline or have a way to report back on that success, because you're going to need that runway. 80-20 rule, I'm almost done. 80-20 rule, this is a big one. Not everyone is meant to be an entrepreneur. I'll say it again, not everyone is meant to be an entrepreneur. We can't try to make everybody an entrepreneur here. You're going to get 80% of your results from 20% of your program beneficiaries in these type of programs. So don't try to save everyone. It'll drag you down. Focus on the bright spots. Get behind those people. You will get your impact numbers. It is very good when a small company becomes a mid company, becomes a large company. All right. That is success. So don't be afraid of that, and focus your energy at the bright spots. Finally, appreciate blended finance, as new as Kathy and Ryan both said. It's a brilliant point, but you have to do a lot of educating as a program manager. There's going to be turnover. There's going to be people coming in and out from the donor side. You're going to have new investors coming in. I mean, we had companies that thought we were giving away grants all the time. We pissed off a lot of people when they finally sat down with us and like, wait, I thought you were giving us a grant. Like, no, we're investing. So you have to constantly be educating people in this game. And if you're not ready to do that, don't sign up for it. But if you have that, if you're ready for that, be prepared for be prepared to educate a lot. You'll do just fine. So that's it from our part. I just want to again say thank you. For the program was just phenomenal. We loved working with Global Affairs. And now what's most important is to hear, I think, from two stakeholders, companies and investors, from their perspective. So I'm going to turn it over to Dagmawit Shifro, who is a key project manager on this program, and she's going to do some great interviews with two wonderful companies that were part of our program. So over to you, Dagny.
Thank you, Matt, and thank you everyone for joining. So my name is Dagmawit Shifro. I've worked with RENEW for around 4 years now, and I'm currently the Senior Investment Manager for Ethiopia. So I have the pleasure of introducing two stakeholders and that participated in a few of the ABG initiatives. So the big questions that we're trying to answer with this one is, did this work? And did it help you? And what would you change for next time? Or in the future, blended finance projects for SMEs, what should be changed? So with my two stakeholders that I'm interviewing today, I would like to note that we only have around a few minutes with them. So I will ask them to restrain their feedback to 2 minutes per question. First off, I would like to introduce Thijs Hagos, who is the founder and CEO of Luna and Fresh Corner, which has now grown to become one of the largest exporters in the country, and which is also the owner of the successful Fresh Corner grocery chain that you see around Addis. So Thijs, you were on the one of the first graduates of the execs program. So my first question to you would be, was the program effective at helping you create more growth and impact at Luna? Yes.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Yes.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Yeah, as you just mentioned, the program has helped us very significantly to increase our sales. I can say that since 2017, we have increased our sales volume both in the export market and in the local market by almost 100%. I was just checking the figures right now. And I cannot say that it's 100% from the executive training that we have got this growth, but I can say that it has contributed significantly to the success of the growth. Because the overall management setup that we have established after the executive program is completely a new phenomenon in our company. And it has helped us to not only to come to this level, to also continue sustainably for a long time success. I believe that the executive program has introduced to us a modern management system, like having regular meetings with our management team, operational meetings, planning, budgeting, time management. I can say that the executive program has in fact helped me to change or modify my personality. So I'm really thankful for the program, and of course to Matt, who has pursued the training to us in a very effective way. So I'm really supporting this program, and I believe that this program will help to contribute to significantly to decrease the poverty level in this country, because as we know that most of the management systems that we have in this country in most of the less developed countries is based on a traditional way, and introducing a modern management system will help to make their operation to be sustainable and at the same time to be globally competitive, which is very, very important. So this is what I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you. So my next question is around the same thing that you're mentioning. Are there any similar programs like this available in the market? Was this something that the Canadian government should have sponsored?
Truly, honestly speaking, I haven't seen any program that can really replace this program, because it's very, very practical, and it's a program that really is directly related with the major problem that we are facing day to day. And I haven't seen or heard any program that can really replicate this program. So it's peculiar and novel by its nature, and it's very, very effective. So I believe that this type of programs need to be supported, which indirectly will support the overall economic sustainability of countries like ours. Because I believe that unless and otherwise we support and make the management or people or personnel in these countries to be effective in their operation, it's very difficult to make the bring the economic enhancement of this country. So I think it's a very good program that needs to be promoted.
Good. So my last question for you would be, is there any way we could improve the ASICS program? What would you change for next time, like for the future blended finance projects? What would you suggest us to change?
I don't have much comment on it, because honestly, I don't really think there is nothing much to change or to modify. But one thing that I believe need to be done is, if we can add, I think we tried it with math, like a refreshment, very short refreshment programs regularly, because by the end of the day, we need to refresh ourselves and rehearse the training, like it can be once a year or something like that, to make sure that we are applying what we have trained in the program regularly. That is the only comment that I do have.
Thank you so much, Tess, and keep rocking
Thank you.
this field. So do we have Samrawit? I know she's having some internet issues.
Yes, I'm on.
Perfect. All right, so my next guest is Samrawit Mogas, who is the owner of and founder of Travel Ethiopia. She has graduated from the execs program, and also is an investee from the Impact Angel Network. Samrawit, so you are passionate about professionalizing the tourism in the country, but due to COVID and the current unrest, we understand it's been hard. So did ABG or the execs program help you weather this storm that came from the COVID and the unrest? And were you more resilient due to this program? So just generally, what was the biggest impact, if there is, from the program that you had during this challenging time?
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity. Yes, I was a part of the executive program. During the COVID time, RENEW has tried to leverage my company status by connecting us with a local company where we would have been able to hire our vehicles. That was the most challenging. That is still, it is a very challenging time. And at the same time, RENEW has also tried to organize some webinars, Zoom meetings on how to tackle during the COVID time. Yes, I have, the support that I get, although the impact where RENEW trying to make by joining with a local company was not productive. in a way, RENEW has tried to contribute during the difficult time. But at the same time, our case was not only that, as you very well know, it is not only the COVID that the tourism industry has faced. Well, as you know, the security issue has the most negative impact on our industry. But RENEW has tried, and I think most people who took part has benefited. But I feel that RENEW also need to have a follow-up program so that the momentum that started 2019, 2020 will continue.
Sounds great. So just from the execs program, what was your the biggest impact that led to your personality or to you personally and on your business?
The course is not only the impact was not only on the professional, but also on the personal life of mine. And I'm grateful because it's not only me, but two of my management staff has already took part in that course. I believe we would have gone further and have taken the company to a higher level had we not been negatively impacted by COVID. COVID has changed a lot. We could have progressed a lot. But during the COVID time, we have restructured the company according to the course that we took. And my company is completely different from the company that it used to be. If we are going to start, working, if we are going to have the business, I believe that course that we took, the restructure and the reorganized method we used for the company, will certainly upscale us. We are simply waiting to generate, to have an income.
Definitely. So just as a woman entrepreneur, how could programs like ABG do more for women entrepreneurs going forward?
I just want to give you an example. I don't want
I think you're breaking up a bit.
to call the name of the project, but in 2009, or 20, there was a program where we were selected, and from Ethiopia, 18 women went to Rwanda. The expenses were covered.
Summerweet, you're a bit choppy, so we might follow up with you. We're going to be doing and sharing some of the lessons learned after this session. So I think because your internet's not holding out, we might need to move on to the next segment. Good. Dagmawit, any thoughts as we wrap up this segment?
Yeah, no, I think what we tried to hear from what we have tried to hear, I believe the project, as I was also part of the project management team, I believe it had a lot of impact for a lot of entrepreneurs which are not here today. It's more practical as well as implementable. I know the implementations are a bit challenging, but what we have learned as the program has a lot of impact and has opened a lot of doors for the entrepreneurs. So thank you for the participants, and I'll move over to you for the next station.
Thanks, Dagi. And thank you, Samarweet and Tess. We continue to want to learn from you and other entrepreneurs about and share it with the wider community about how we can make these kind of programs more effective to help you grow and create jobs. So now we want to hear from Jonathan Baker, who is a member of the Impact Angel Network, an investor in our blended finance vehicle, which was created under the Accelerating Business Growth Program, and an active investor in Ethiopia. Jonathan, you've been on a number of trips to Ethiopia. You lived here briefly in 2011. You've invested in a number of companies and worked on deals that were supported by this program. And now you are investing in this blended finance vehicle. So you have a wide breadth of experience to draw from. So my first question for you is, are blended finance programs like this actually helping to mobilize capital, or would you have done this without RENEW and ABG?
To answer, I did this without RENEW and ABG 3 times. I invested in a tractor leasing model, a block making machine, and kind of a mini 7-Eleven in Gambella. And they were all total losses. And I would have given up if I hadn't found RENEW, because what RENEW represented to me was an on-the-ground team that could do the due diligence and the follow-up and the training and support that I couldn't. I'll continue to invest because of the footprint that RENEW has in Ethiopia. When I've been there with the team, it looks and feels to me like a kind of a McKinsey or a Bain office with some crackerjack, really smart indigenous talent who can do the groundwork of vetting these companies and supporting them. So yeah, I wouldn't still be investing in Africa if it weren't for RENEW.
Thanks, Jonathan. So my next question is, are there more people out there like you who want to be investing but need programs to support them?
Yes, absolutely. I know many. I think in my community and here in Charlottesville, Virginia, but also in the broader DC area, there are a number of people who have been successful and want to give back and have fatigued of the traditional aid programs and are excited to both bring their money but also their experience to the various sectors where they were successful. They want to bring what they know and their resources to Africa. My network doesn't have billionaires in it, but it's a group of people who can invest, hundreds of thousands of dollars in the right deals. But again, absent a team to support those investments, it wouldn't make sense.
Yeah, it is. I think it is really key to have people on the ground, as your experience has shown. So now my third question for you, and then I'd love to hear any other kind of thoughts you have. But what enhancements would you make to the services offered by Accelerating Business Growth, and in particular for investors? Are there any more things that we could be doing to attract investors to opportunities to small and mid-sized enterprises in Ethiopia?
Yeah, Laura, that's a good question. I guess I'd say 3 things. The first thing is that I've been a little disappointed with the number of deals that I've had the opportunity to review, so more deal flow. The second is I'd like to see more geographic diversity to kind of mitigate some of the geographic risks that are in place in these different countries. And then if RENEW had the capacity, it would be great if they could start seeding businesses, meaning here's a like country with a like opportunity. Could you spawn a known business play that worked really well in, say, Rwanda? Could you bring that to Ethiopia or vice versa, so that you're taking good business models, staffing them with people that you've trained up, and executing against those in the new markets. Did that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we learn a lot in one place, and it just makes sense to move them around in some cases. Anything else that you would like to add for the community that's listening in?
I think I briefly touched on this, but one of the things that makes it really interesting for me and some of my fellow investors is the chance to mentor and come to Africa and to do a guest lecture or to come alongside an entrepreneur and coach them, but also to sit on some of the boards of these companies and help them navigate their growth. It's really kind of monetizing our own individual playbooks that our careers have provided us, and bringing it somewhere else is pretty exciting and increases the attachment to the work.
Mm-hmm. Good. Thank you so much. Your feedback every time we've interacted with you is very helpful, and we look forward to continuing to get that as we move forward, hopefully with other blended finance programs. So just a big thank you and we look forward to seeing you next time in Ethiopia. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Justin Reeser, my colleague, who's going to lead us in our breakout discussions to discuss some different topics related to this call and to blended finance. Justin?
Yeah, thank you, Laura. Nice to speak to all of you. So as Laura mentioned, we want to hear from you. I think you all have a very unique perspective on blended finance and this model of development and investing. So we see this as an opportunity to share wisdom and get some really good feedback from each of you. So I think what will happen is we will sort of randomly be assigned to rooms. And I think the team is working on that right now. So unless I'm missing something logistically here, Emily, I believe you'll break us out now. And there are questions that you'll see on a slide. So these are some of the discussion topics that we'll be going over with our groups. So Emily, thumbs up or confirmation that that we're on our way.
We're on our way.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. Thanks for bearing with us. It is our one of our first attempts at Microsoft Teams. Okay, so the update is that the assigning wheel is spinning, which I believe means it is organizing each of you. So should be pretty close.
As you wait, feel free to chat in any questions everyone has. We will try to follow up with folks. I see some questions about average annual sales and things like that. I don't know if we'll be able to answer everything, but we would definitely try to in the follow-up report. So you use chat as much as you can. I encourage that. All right, Laura, why don't you take us through these questions, because I'm not certain that this Teams thing is working.
Good, thanks, Matt. So the
You guys
questions
did
that
try
were,
a dry run, right?
Right? We might just be facing technology
Technology and Ethiopia bandwidth too.
and dealing with your donor who said, but we only use Teams, not Zoom for security reasons. Thank you.
Another lesson learned, right?
Good. So while we wait, let's just walk through these questions here. So the first one, and if you want to chat answers into the chat questions or answers into the chat, that'd be great. So our question to everyone, was there any surprises from the presentation? Any lessons learned that you might apply to your work? And then in room one, we are hoping to discuss, is there a risk in having too many impact requirements in blended finance projects? Not enough? What is the balance? In room two, what is a good value for money from blended finance projects that donors should be seeking? How do we measure that? The next question is, blended finance projects are different from a typical NGO project. What needs to be done to equip the donor community to evaluate and manage these projects? And then the next question is, are SMEs the best focal point for blended finance programs in developing countries, or are there other better beneficiaries that will deliver blended results? I want that room. Should profit creation, i.e. sustainability of the model, be an outcome of blended finance? Does this create tension between donors and managers, and how do we find a middle ground? Any updates, Emily, on the status, or should we take questions on this floor?
Let's do questions on this floor, Laura.
Okay, if anyone, I see some questions to start here, Matt. I'll direct them to you or others on the call, and then if anybody wants to raise their hand and go off mute with a question, that's also great. So from Darren Barry, I think he says companies with boards are among the missing middle. How large are the participating company in terms of number of employees? Maybe Matt, you can give our definition of an SME.
Yeah, I think it's tricky. I mean, Darren's a great question, and I think it's a moving target, honestly. There's so many people that have tried to define SMEs. Actually, one of our advisors, Tom Gibson, is like the grandfather of SME categorization and SME investing. And he came up with some complicated equation that uses GNI and, per capita and all these weird things. But the point is, I think it depends, like per sector. Like, so you look at a textile sector, that's going to have way higher number of jobs, often lower revenue, especially in an early country like Ethiopia. So you might have still a small enterprise or a micro enterprise that's at 50 employees and somewhere around $75,000, $80,000 in revenue per year. But you then look at a kind of a services business that will have a totally different profile. The definition that we use for East Africa, and I'll tell you why we use it, is that companies below 2 million EBITDA, which is earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, amortization, which is often an indicator that investment firms use to do valuation. Why we say below 2 million EBITDA is because companies generally at 2 million EBITDA finally become targets for larger private equity funds. So below that, that's about 95% of the private sector. Above the micro enterprise, how we look at micro enterprises is, are you looking to scale? Is this a subsistence lifestyle business? Which again, most micro enterprises are. Very few are looking to break out of that and really build a world-class company. So it's in between those two worlds. Less than 2 million EBITDA, and what's your orientation towards growth? Are you looking to grow your company? If the answer to a small micro enterprise is yes, I'm looking to build a great business, okay, well then we would categorize you as an SME, and we're going to grow you up into that level. So we try to use as big of a definition as possible, because again, if you start to narrow too much, and I see a lot of impact firms do this, they make tons of mistakes. They really get narrowed down, because we've all learned that The more specific you are in the investment industry, the more successful you will be. Sure, in a fully developed, thriving private sector economy, that is true. But here, where there is so many unknowns, the pipeline that you start to winnow down based on a very narrow set of criteria that you and your donor and your investors have defined, you might find out you have zero pipeline, or you might have 10 deals. You need about 100 deals to close 2 to 3 deals per year coming into the top of that pipe. That's about a 2.5% conversion rate. If you can't go out and get eyes on 100 deals, your definition for SME is too narrow. So that's what we've used. It's a bit of a long answer, but I hope that helps.
Good, thanks, Matt. Next, I have a question from Jonathan for Kathy. He says, "Hi, Canada team, great work. Have you done this sort of thing elsewhere in the world?" Kathy, are you there?
I am here. Hi, Jonathan. With RENEW, no. The ABG project was a first foray with RENEW in Ethiopia. In terms of as a department, I think you were on at the beginning of the call where Ryan Clark, our head of development here, talked about the International Assistance Innovation Program, which is really seeking, it's a much larger Canadian commitment, seeking to do blended finance. But that said, which is with much bigger partners or implementing partners than RENEW. And so that's the interesting thing about this event today is, working with not necessarily the Convergences or the FinDev Canadas or other DFIs, but working with, all due respect RENEW, but smaller implementing partners and trying to figure out how to make that work. So certainly GAC is fumbling along trying to figure out how to do this through various partners in various countries, but the degree to which that has been successful, perhaps I imagine there are probably some very similar lessons learned across other countries as to what I had shared in my lessons learned.
Yeah, it's really great work.
If there's anything more specific behind the question, please let me know.
I'll reach out to you separately. It's just the investment in the management training and the backing of the entrepreneurs is just a critical piece that's been missing. It was a nice job.
Hear you loud and clear. Thanks. and nice to see you again.
Good. So Yosfa and David asked, to what degree do you work with governments and funds such as NORAD, Norfund in Norway, for example? So I'll just take that one quickly. So we are blended finance vehicles. There are some development finance institutions like Norfund that are looking at that. So that would be one way that they're involved. I'm not for sure about NORAD. Some Scandinavian countries are still a little bit shy of working with for-profit companies, to some of the questions, both from the lessons learned from Matt and Kathy. But I anticipate there'll be more opportunities in the future for organizations like RENEW to work with organizations like NORAD. The next question is from, I might get your name wrong, but Nakasi Green from USAID. The question is that we mentioned that we're a for-profit company. So in terms of question 5, which is, should profit creation, sustainability of the model be an outcome of blended finance, and how to manage that tension? How does the model work for investors to get a return and do the donors? So Matt, I will turn that over to you to just talk about some of the conversations that we've had around that.
Sure. Yeah, no, it's a great question. So how does the model work, and do investors get a return? Yes, and I think they absolutely should. That's the purpose. So blended finance is trying to, so on the risk return kind of continuum, if you look at it as a linear line, most deals over here are falling below the return profile for their risk. You kind of want them on that linear return profile, and so, or better. And so especially SMEs. So what the donor is doing is it's buying down the transaction costs. And so when you look at a a $50,000 deal or a $500,000 deal, the cost to close that deal here in Ethiopia, for example, can be $150,000. When you bring in legal fees, the accounting fees, ESG fees, the M&E fees, the diligence fees, all of those back and forth, the time, you see very quickly why the cost of doing those deals is economically unsustainable. And so what the donor is doing in this case is they're buying down those costs, i.e. paying for those costs, so that the investors, the Jonathans, can put that money directly into those deals and therefore not have to put in $1 million or $650,000, of which $150,000 of that is taken immediately out just to cover due diligence fees, and only getting $500,000. If you actually plug that into the calculator to hit a 25% gross IRR on that deal in 5 years, that extra $150,000 on that $500,000 makes it almost impossible for you to really get that return. So taking that off the table and paying for that's a huge role. Does the donor get a return? Gosh, I hope so. I would love to see that. I would love nothing more as a tax-paying U.S. citizen for blended finance programs to have those companies have some type of structuring in place that we can pay that back. And I actually think over time that's where the donor community should move. It's very complicated from a legal perspective. The lawyers on the call are ripping their hair out right now. But again, I've been very impressed with Canada. They launched a program called IAIP, which is trying to do very much just like this, similar to the USDFC, which is now under the under DCA under USDFC. It's how can we actually create models and modals to get funding in, but also to cover those costs, to get that money. Either it's concessional, repayable grants, anything like that, I think is progress in the right direction. But as a donor and as a project implementer, you really have to be clear there's going to be money that is just pure TA. You're not going to get a return on that. There is money that you can, and sitting down and mapping that out and how that all works, say that the company does very well. Well, maybe if it gets over a specific hurdle rate, you can get some return on that investment. And I think those types of programs are very good. I would love to see more of that happening because you can really multiply the impact much greater.
Can I just add something to that?
Yes.
Sure. Yeah.
Certainly for me and a couple of other folks who are investing, we're not opportunists. For us, the presence of margin or IRR is an indication that the business is viable and it has and so understanding that it's a marker of vitality for the business really, I think, takes the edge off of whether or not we're profiteering at this point.
Yeah, that's a key point. The next question from Rahel. Thanks for being on the call, Rahel. One of the investors' preference is more deal flow. How can donor projects help? Well, I think that question, I'll start by saying, I think that question is different in different markets. Ethiopia, I don't know what percentage, but at least 30-40% of deals that we put forward, there's often challenges on the regulatory front in Ethiopia. So your work, our work, continued work on the regulatory environment in Ethiopia, I think will increase the deal flow here. But again, that's hard to do because I think it's really key, as discussed, to tie that in with money speaks, and we can get it right when policies are changed, when they're aligned with capital. Matt or Kat? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah,
Matt?
I also think there needs to be way more collaboration between partners on the ground. I think we get in these little silos and we don't share, and I don't think that's a productive way to build the ecosystem. And so everybody kind of gets in this protective mode of their donor funding at the detriment, I think, of the ecosystem overall, to be very blunt about it. And I think we can do a lot better, Renew included, and very much at the front of that. We should be actively reaching out to other people that are in the space, accelerators, incubators, doing a lot more. Has it been the best deal flow coming from them? No. But can we improve that? Yeah, and that feedback loop has to be a lot more frequent. I think that's breaking down silos is a key piece of what is holding back the formation of this ecosystem more from happening. Can't stand it.
Good point. Darren comments that the central bank and stats agency has their definition of SMEs, which, yeah, we're familiar with it. We, as Matt said, we've chosen a pretty broad definition of SMEs. We are sector agnostic investors and so on. And so we've just found it easy to adopt a pretty broad definition of SMEs. Sion comments about, in particular, does the model work for just for established companies or just startups? And I can quickly answer that one. Definitely, someone else had commented, what is the average size? So I might not give you the average sales revenue right now of the companies, but we really tried to target with our outreach to the community, both men and women executives, and then companies of all sizes. As long as those on the smaller side really were looking to scale, those are the ones that we targeted. Anything else, Matt, on that point?
About 40% of our portfolio is startups. So absolutely.
So, and then this goes right along with this line. How did you identify the beneficiary SMEs, particularly to ensure diversity and channeling some benefits to the poorest of the poor? So back to Kathy's question, how are we making sure that we're impacting the poorest of the poor? What is the best lesson on how to attract private investor for dollar to match the donor funds? Maybe I missed it. Well, I'll take a stab at this because I'm really sad that we're not getting more room number 4. Our SME is the best focal point for blended finance. And I welcome people having other thoughts. But as I look at SMEs in our portfolio, ones that are scaling, ones that have been a part of the program, like Tessa's that are scaling, I just have, in my experience, I haven't seen a better unit of change than an SME. In many cases, an SME that's led by an ethical, moral leader who cares about his or her community. They are investing in infrastructure. They often provide medical care for their employees. They are feeding their employees. They are working with community. They're upgrading local education facilities. They're subsidizing teachers' salaries. All these kind of benefits flow. And in my opinion, I have not seen more powerful and sustainable impact for the poorest of the poor. I know there's other opinions out there, and much work must continue to be done in other kind of donor areas around education and healthcare and so forth. But I think the SME as a unit of change is an incredibly powerful thing. Not all stories go well. We have ones that fail and don't achieve their potential as well. But if we can get a few right, over the period of 10 years, you will see just an incredible amount of jobs, local community support, and so on and so forth. Matt or Kathy, anything else to add to that question about the poorest of the poor?
Yeah, I think, really, so the way that the companies were evaluated and admitted was initially referrals. So we had a lot of referrals came through, and then companies that we are looking at to invest in, obviously, go through a pretty rigorous analysis and due diligence process. Those companies go through the executives program. And one of the impact indicators that we do track and we look at and report to our investors and the donor community is job creation potential and smallholder farmers supported. So we look back in the value chain. We try to understand how that's documented. I'm very excited to see new technology entering the space to make that track better and us to be able to report that better. But that is very much a part of our impact narrative. And SMEs, dollar for dollar, as Laura pointed out already, are a powerful, because multinationals will come in and they're repatriating most of their capital, but local businesses that have an investor providing them that capital, they're going to turn that money over multiple times and keep that capital here. And so they have a lot of circulation and a lot of reach back that is very measurable especially with things like blockchain, where you can really start to go back and see and trace sesame that's getting manufactured into tahini, which is going to Sabra and being used by Pepsi in the United States to feed that glut. That's coming from Ethiopia. We've invested in tahini. How do we know that impact? Now we can really start to track that. It's thousands and thousands of people that we're impacting from that one investment. So it's evolving, it's getting better and better, and I think that's going to be really one of the next frontiers in impact investing, is really being able to tell that narrative to the consumer and letting them decide, how much do I want to impact with this $1 of purchasing power I have.
Good, thank you. There's some other great questions in the chat and comments as well. Appreciate all of your perspectives, and we will try to answer as many of those things as possible in our follow-up. But we also want to honor everybody's time and keep to the schedule. So I just want to thank you all for attending. Our goal was to learn. I hope that we all have some new things to take away. If you'd like to learn more or continue discussions on blended finance learning, please reach out. As we've said, we'll circulate a summary to the participants, and we encourage you to participate in more blended finance learnings happening this week, i.e. the Convergence State of Blended Finance session tomorrow. We want to thank everyone who is a part of the ABG project, and a special thank you to the Global Affairs Canada team. Kathy mentioned many of you by name. We just are so grateful for how you worked with us on so many things, and for your innovation with this project. I also want to thank all of the amazing small and mid-sized enterprises that were a part of the program, and also, of course, the investors that we work with. And lastly, to the ABG team that was a part of making all of this happen. So a big thank you to everyone, and we appreciate all of you who joined the call today. Thank you and goodbye.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks. Thank you so much.
This was super interesting. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Bye.